I welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. This is a webinar, a session on LabVIEW unit testing, specifically on a tool called InstaCoverage, which is a flexible tool for unit testing in the LabVIEW programming language. I am joined by the InstaCoverage team, two marketing colleagues, Bea and Flora, who are in the audience, and two technical team members, Balint and Daniel, who are on the panel with me. This is my browser with the InstaCoverage homepage. This is a unit testing tool for the LabVIEW programming language, fully developed by Inquiry Labs, which is a company based in Budapest. We are around 50 people in this company. We are a software company. We do products, we do services, mostly in the safety critical software domain. We'll come back to this homepage as well. Now let's jump into the topic. Let's open LabVIEW. This is a practical session, so the session will be centered around LabVIEW. And I'll open now a project I prepared for this session, which is basically a simple calculator, code-wise. So this is a VI in the test which we prepared called divide. So it's basically a division. Let's open it. You see that we have two operands, A and B, and we will divide these two operands and output the result. And we have an additional error output for, you can imagine, division by 0. So let's look into the code. No surprise here. So we check if you see here, we check if the B operand is 0. If yes, then we output an error with a message, division by 0. Otherwise, we do the division. So we can try this. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 4 divided by 0 is an error, division by 0. Okay, so this is easy. You see it's not object-oriented code. We'll see in other examples in the second block of the session, at least of the demo, that InstaCoverage works for object-oriented LabVIEW code as well. Now we keep it simple and go with this simple non-object-oriented VI. So if InstaCoverage is installed, you can do it via the VI package manager. Then the easiest to see that InstaCoverage is installed is this icon, which is the InstaCoverage icon, the same that you can see on the website. Yeah, so InstaCoverage. And otherwise, InstaCoverage, I made a pause because I forgot that I forgot to introduce myself because I'm not using my personal Zoom account. You see Inquiry Labs as the Zoom profile. Sorry for that. My name is Peter Bokor, and I'm the head of product for InstaCoverage. Okay, so back to the divide VI. So this is the VI in the test. You see that InstaCoverage is installed, for example, through this icon. And otherwise, InstaCoverage is a plugin of the LabVIEW IDE. So you will see if it's installed a tool, you will see that various options. In this case, you see InstaCoverage and generate unit tests. So you go to the VI under test and let InstaCoverage generate a unit test for you. So this is the first time it loads things. It was a bit slower, but this was the first time. You know, if you look at the name of InstaCoverage, Insta speaks for being fast, or stands for being fast, and coverage stands for code coverage. We'll come to it later. So yeah, so being fast means that InstaCoverage is a very, very performant tool, execution time-wise. We'll see, we'll have benchmarks for it, and we'll give it a look later. Okay, so here you have to specify the folder where the unit test will be generated. It can be just simply unit tests. We are inside the project folder, as you can see. So we select the folder. It's confirmed that the unit test is generated. Now, these are the assets that InstaCoverage generated for us for this specific VI test divide. Let's see what these assets are. So the most important one, or yeah, one of the most important ones is the harness VI. If you are familiar with the unit test framework by NI, then this test model will be familiar for you. Otherwise, it's a very simple model, really. What you see here is the result of the generation. So the divide under test is in the middle. And you see a setup VI on the left-hand side and the teardown VI on the right-hand side. Plus you see a test case ID input to the harness VI and the result output of the harness VI. So basically, the setup VI is where you prepare the test, define test cases, stuff like this. And the teardown VI is where you shut down the test, and this is where you evaluate the result of the test. As you see, the teardown VI has a result output, which is basically the overall output of the test. The test case ID is a framework input. So as you will see in a minute, in a nice configuration, test configuration window, you can specify the test cases, and each test case is an ID, and the InstaCoverage framework will feed this input and execute the tests. So the harness VI is basically the heart of the test execution. Now let's open the InstaCoverage test configuration file. These assets, before I do that, these assets are per test suite. So I have this divide VI, which is a divide and a test. I may have multiple test suites, so multiple tuples like this for the same VI and the test. And obviously, if you have multiple VI and the tests, then you may have multiple InstaCoverage unit tests as well. So let's open the test configuration editor. So this is it. It's very much, you will realize, NXG style, GUI-wise. Now, luckily, one thing, and I didn't killed or ended about NXG is the nice UI. So hopefully this will be preserved and used in the LabVIEW Classic line as well. Yeah, so InstaCoverage has, now speaking of NXG, InstaCoverage has an NXG version as well. But as we all know, NXG is, and I decided to discontinue the NXG line. So most probably that version of the tool won't be used too often. Yeah, so what you can see here is the configuration window for an InstaCoverage unit test. You see here the path of the harness VI, the path of the VI and the test, the path of the setup VI, teardown VI, and here you can see the list of test cases which are pre-generated. So by default, InstaCoverage generates one test case. We can add more test cases, which we will do later. And per test case, you can add comments and requirements. I will open the editor for the moment. Come back for the harness VI, because this is, it can be seen as can be thought of as kind of a map of a unit test. So you could open the setup VI from the project explorer as well. This is my practice. I usually open it from the harness VI because it's really like a map. Let's open the setup VI. Okay, so you see here that that the pre-generated stuff by InstaCoverage, it's really a best effort generation. So it's basically it generates constants for the VI and the test as inputs, but it has no like test logic like in it. It's really it's just a best effort generation. What I do here now, so you see here, it's basically a case structure where each case corresponds to one test case. Now I will come, okay, let's make it bigger. This is for test case 1. We have only one test case at the moment. The default case is mandatory in LabVIEW, so InstaCoverage will generate it too, so that after generation you have an executable test, but it kind of exercises the VI and the test, but in a random way. So let's add the test logic to it. So let's have this first easy example where I test 4 divided by 2. I can clean up here and close it and save it. Now, before we open the teardown VI, let's stop for a moment and see these wires. You see that the VI and the test is pre-connected by InstaCoverage through the generation. So the output of the setup VI, which are the operands in this case, are wired together with the VI and the test. Similarly, the teardown is wired together with the VI and the test on the output. Now, this is done by InstaCoverage Pro, which is the not free version of InstaCoverage. InstaCoverage Core will see the different pricing options and so-called, maybe let's call them plans on the website later. But these wires would be missing if you generate tests using InstaCoverage Core. Okay, so I will open the teardown VI. So I must admit that the name teardown is a bit misleading, or maybe misleading, because it's not only for tearing down the test, or so I don't know, cleaning up. It's really for not only, so it's for that too, but also a very important role of it is to evaluate the result of the test. So similarly to the setup, we have all test cases, so a test case structure with cases where each case corresponds to a test case. Now, you see here the pre-generated constants. So it's not only that. So on the setup side, you see pre-generated constants for the as inputs for the VI and the test. On the teardown side, you see basic comparison logic, which basically it's best for two. It just compares the output of the VI and the test with constants. Now, in the case of test case 1, which was 4 divided by 2, we simply, what do we expect? We expect a non-error output, so this constant will be fine, and the result is 2. And if both these conditions are satisfied, then we output a true Boolean output, meaning that the result of the test is passed. True stands for passed, false stands for failed. Okay, so that was the human part, so to say. The generation is InstaCoverage. The test logic is a human being. And now we are ready to execute the tests. So you can do it in various ways. First of all, let's go to the InstaCoverage configuration file, right-click on it, and run the unit test. So what you see here is that test case 1 is executed and it's passed. You see the check here, the green check. What you can see otherwise is that the result of the overall unit test is failed because on the GUI, at least, we aggregate the coverage, the code coverage, into the final test result. Why it is failed? Because as you see, InstaCoverage Pro, this is a Pro feature as well, will list the uncovered diagrams. So those diagrams that the test didn't execute. And if you double click on it, and this is a figure, code coverage 66% is basically a ratio of all diagrams, executed diagrams divided by all diagrams. And this is a nice feature of InstaCoverage. You can double click on the uncovered diagrams, in this case, on this one, and it will jump into the code and show you which diagram is not covered. So now we have a feedback that the test developer has a feedback. Okay, you forgot about this one, extend your test. And this is what we are going to do now. I close this. So what's the task? The task is to add an additional test case which will exercise the missing diagram, okay? Now, what you can do is that you do everything manually, adding the test case. A very nice feature of a beta version of InstaCoverage. So InstaCoverage, the last version of InstaCoverage is, so the current version of InstaCoverage is called 3.3, which we released the end of last year. And since then, we kept working, and we have a very exciting new version of InstaCoverage, the 3.4, which is a beta. If you're interested in trying this beta, let us know. And I will now highlight a feature of this beta version. So I opened, this is the version I have installed for today's session. So this is the key, so this sync icon. So what's the feature? So you basically, it's already available in InstaCoverage, in the official InstaCoverage release 3.3, that you can add test cases here. The new test case is going to be the, let's call it the divide test case. Sorry, division by 0 test case. And you see that we have 2 test cases now. Now, with the current InstaCoverage version, you can save this configuration. You have to go to the setup VI and to the teardown VI, and you add this new test case manually, which is tedious. And we got numerous user requests to add the feature um, which helps you to synchronize the code and the test configuration. Now, in this beta version, it's possible, at least from here, from the test configuration towards the code. Okay, now it's done. I save the configuration, and hopefully it's a beta, but hopefully when I open the setup VI, the new test case will be there. Let's see. Indeed, it's there. Again, it's just the test, the case. So it's not filled with logic. There is no AI here. It's really deterministic test case template or skeleton generation. And now let's add, I don't know, 4 divided by 0. It's a division by 0 case. And let's go to the teardown. I expect that the new test case is here as well, indeed. So what do I add here? I basically expect an error output and division by 0 here. Let's clean up. And basically here, I really don't have to fill it. I'm only interested in the error output in the moment. So actually, I don't need this. Okay, so my colleague warned me that I did an error, I did a mistake in the setup. So let's come back to it after I finish this one. So I saved this one. So this test is passed if, okay, this is a typo. If I get an error on the output of the VI and the test. Yes, because B is upwards, A is downwards. Thank you, Balint. Okay. Now, I will show you another way of executing the unit tests. This icon is basically a shortcut for executing all all InstaCoverage unit tests in the project. Now we have only one, so it's basically equal to the way I showed you before. Look, the result is as expected. We have a new test case here, the division by 0 test case, which is which is passed. All test cases are passed, plus the code coverage is now 100%. So we have an overall passed test suite result. Okay, so now a quick jump to back to the homepage. So yeah, feature overview here, screenshot there, and I will stop here for a moment with the table. Before we discuss this table a little bit, let me go to download. So this is what I meant with the 2 plans. We have InstaCoverage Core, which is a free product. It gives you basically the GUI. It is limited in terms of the template generation. like I explained, InstaCoverage Core will not generate wires for you. It does not support code coverage measurement, and it does not support an API. On the other hand, InstaCoverage Pro supports all these, but it's not free. It's basically $300 per seat per year. But this is not a marketing presentation, so I will stop here and I go back to the home and show you this. So so we listed here the big players, so to say, in the LabVIEW unit testing business. There is a newcomer called AST, which is not on this table, but there is this very nice article about unit testing tools for LabVIEW, and this covers AST as well. So we very much recommend to read this, I would say, almost complete overview. I will not mention, we can come back to it in the end of the session if you want to compare the features and the approach, like the unit testing model and the unit testing approach of the various tools, because they are different. So they all aim at the same goal, but they approach it in different ways. So I wouldn't say that there is a best tool. It depends on the usage really, and on the application. One aspect I would highlight maybe is the performance. So we have a GitHub project which is called LabVIEW Knowledge Base of Inquiry Labs, which is public. We have a number of wiki pages there discussing different topics. And one, you can call it a white paper, is a performance benchmark comparison of the execution time of the various tools. So back then when we started this project, our main motivation was why we built a new tool is because we used the unit test framework by NI, and I used to be an employee by BSH in Berlin. It's a Bosch company for home appliances. BSH Home Appliances, that's the name of the company. And we used the unit test framework in our LabVIEW project. It was a lot of LabVIEW code, and it turned out to be a bottleneck. As the project grew, it turned out to be the bottleneck so basically the time we needed to wait for the unit test framework to end. It can be a very, very, very a slow tool if you have a big code base. So we started the InstaCoverage project. That's a bit of a nostalgia and history of the tool. And this is not, you see, it was an earlier version of InstaCoverage, but the trend is still this one. So you see, this is an exponential graph, like a display of the execution time. And what you can see here is that the UTF is very, very slow. So this year we have the number of unit tests, so it's a couple of hundreds, and this is the execution time in seconds. And you see that you have here is 1,500 seconds versus for the same test set, unit test set, so to say, you have under a minute with the other tools. And InstaCoverage is the orange one. And if you compare them to the VI tester and Karaya, you see it's pretty much the same, like order of magnitude, but we measure code coverage. So we do code analysis while executing the tests. So we do basically more. Karaya is very fast. It's because it's kind of executing the code natively. The VI tester is slower than us, but it does less. So we do think that we do pretty well on the execution time, and this is why we call the tool InstaCoverage. So Insta again stands for the good performance with respect to the execution time. Okay, so I just highlight here, you can browse through these wiki pages. Some of them may be a bit outdated. Sorry for that if it's the case, but you see here interesting tutorials. For example, this one, if you want to use InstaCoverage in a continuous integration environment with Jenkins, so this tutorial takes a Jenkins example, then this document may be useful for you. Or we had another like a pilot project where we experimented with the requirements gateway. This is an NI tool where you can combine the requirements gateway with InstaCoverage in a very natural way. Basically, what you can do is that you use it to measure the percentage or the coverage, basically the implementation coverage, which is the intended use for this tool. And since it's extended, so you can extend the tool and add new integrations to it, the requirements gateway. You can add InstaCoverage or integrate InstaCoverage into it. And beside the implementation coverage, you can add test coverage and see what requirements are tested. Okay. Now let's come back to LabVIEW and to the example project and see what else we can do. Let's execute the test again and generate a report. So if I generate a report, I can select if it's an XML or an HTML. I go for HTML now and I open it. You see it's a very UTF style layout. So UTF was really our role model, so to say, and for the sake of simplicity, we just copied the styling, but this can be changed, obviously. And this will lead me to the next block of the session, which is the advanced usages of InstaCoverage. So what I did now was all manual. So I manually, InstaCoverage generated the report, but I needed to trigger it. Now you can use a Jenkins server, for example, to do it. To basically, the Jenkins server will not, or the continuous integration will not implement the tests, but they can be executed if you do regression testing. So you can have really a streamlined CI setup where InstaCoverage is there to execute and evaluate and report the unit tests. So if InstaCoverage is installed, then you have all we could think of information about InstaCoverage. You can find here in the InstaCoverage help, which is basically a PDF document. This is the 3.4 version, which is the beta version. That you see, it's 30 pages, so it's a lot of information about InstaCoverage. So if you're an InstaCoverage user, you will find a lot of interesting stuff here. And what I'm doing now is that I'll show you the find examples department, because InstaCoverage comes with interesting example projects. It's in the Inquiry Labs folder. Inquiry Labs Ltd is legacy. We changed the company form, so we are not limited anymore. And you see under the Pro demo, you see here two projects, and I will open now the first example project. Okay, so this is the first example project that we ship with InstaCoverage, and it's full of it's basically an object-oriented calculator example. You see the class, you see the member VI, which is basically one main VI with all the calculator operations. And you see unit tests which are generated and saved with the project. And the interesting part, I mean, now you understood in the first during the first block how InstaCoverage works, so there would be no surprise for you here. And you see these API examples here, and I will quickly show you this one, the scope coverage one. And to understand what it's all about, let me open this presentation, which was an internet presentation. We were going to go to an iWeek and all conferences, the GDEFCon, CLA Summit, and other conferences to give talks about InstaCoverage, but because of the virus situation, those conferences didn't take place. This was an internal presentation on InstaCoverage. Okay, so coverage. We have explicit and implicit coverage. Explicit coverage, I explain what it was. So basically, if you have a VI and a test foo, and you define the, so this was a LV test, it's a UTF test, but it applies for InstaCoverage as well. If you have an InstaCoverage test for it, then InstaCoverage, the explicit code coverage measurement will measure the executed and the not executed diagrams within this VI and the test. Now, implicit test coverage is a bit more advanced and also more interesting. So imagine that you have tests for foo and buzz, and you don't have a test for bar, but these tests, these VIs, foo and buzz, call bar as a sub-VI, and say that foo would call this sub-diagram within bar, and the other sub-diagram is never called, nor by, not by foo, nor by buzz. With InstaCoverage, I can define the scope of the code coverage measurement, not on the GUI, but on the, it's advanced. It would be hard. It would be certainly possible, but it would be tricky to design a understandable GUI for it. Now we kept it for the API to do these configurations. You can tell InstaCoverage, and this is what I will show you in a minute, to consider a bigger scope for the code coverage measurement, not only the VI and the test itself. In this example, we would say, okay, the scope is everything basically. we throw in everything. Let's execute all unit tests you have, and let's measure the code coverage on all VIs you have. In this case, the coverage for the bar VI would be 50%, because only one diagram is executed and the other not. And we can now, I simplified this discussion now, because InstaCoverage considers the top level, so the VI itself as a top level diagram. So in this case, we would have 3 diagrams instead of just 2. Okay, so that's the story. So that's explicit versus implicit. And before I come back to the example, let me show you this. So you have, or I come here to the documentation of InstaCoverage, and I jump to code coverage best practices. And here we explain various meaningful configurations for code coverage. And I show you this, for example, which we call the own VI coverage. What it means is the following. We have a VI in the test foo, and we have different unit tests for it, 1, 2, and 3. And we say, okay, execute all these and see and measure the coverage for the very same VI under test. And it will be an aggregated coverage. Or I have this setup. I have one VI under test. This setup we call VI coverage all test suites. So we have one VI under test, and we have unit tests for different VIs, one for foo, one for bar, one for buzz. And like I said, bar and buzz may call foo as a sub VI. So I say, okay, I throw in all unit tests I have. I focus on one VI and see what the coverage is. Or, and this is what we call, sometimes we call it manager coverage, because managers like these metrics, or project coverage, which is when you throw in everything. You throw in all unit tests you have, and you basically say, okay, these are the VIs, all VIs I have, and I want to see what covers what. Okay, so this is the theory. Let's come back to the example project. Again, this comes with your InstaCoverage Pro installation. Why Pro? Because coverage only makes sense for Pro. What's inside is this. Okay, so if you open the palette, you see under Inquiry Labs, InstaCoverage Pro, you see different APIs. You can discover them. Here, what's happening is very simple. Basically, here we have, if I open the help, we see maybe the most important API of InstaCoverage, which is called run tests. It's a polymorphic VI. You can define which tests the API is supposed to execute through an array of InstaCoverage files, through a project path, to a project reference, and other ways. If you define a project, that would mean that InstaCoverage looks into the project and collects all InstaCoverage unit tests and execute them. In this case, we'll collect all InstaCoverage files in the project, which are 2. And this is the important part here. We have an execution settings input of this run test, where we set basically all, you see it here. This is a helper API under utilities of the InstaCoverage API palette. Basically, it's a helper VI to collect the paths of VIs. What we do is we configure the execution for the manager coverage or the project coverage. We throw in everything. Sorry, we throw in everything. Now let me execute it. You see here, this is the scope. So scope is basically all VIs in the project. You have on an InstaCoverage test configuration level, you have the coverage. This is what we saw on the GUI as well. And this is the scope code coverage part, which is available through, you see here, the output of this run test API is a cluster. It has various fields and sub fields, so you can see it's very intuitive. So no magic here. I will now focus on the output. So this is basically the native output of the run test API. What you see here is that for each VI in the scope, you can see, for example, read memory, you see it's only, so there is no explicit test for this VI. It's called as a sub VI, and I have the following details, coverage details for it. I see that this VI has 3 subdiagrams. 2 of them have been covered by some of the tests. And here in an array, you see which of them was executed. This one was not executed. You see this diagram label. So we do this code analysis for you, which means that you can find out which diagram was not executed and do something with it. You can aggregate a custom report, or you can even build some additional tooling on top of this information. Okay, so this was one. So this project has other API examples. I leave it to you to explore it. I will jump to the other example project, which is shipped within InstaCoverage. Let me find LabVIEW. Yeah. Which is the UTF transformation example. Yeah, so the unit test framework. It's a nice native unit testing tool. It's still available, and it's so it seemed that so actually for NXG, and I didn't want to have a unit test framework. That was, I guess, even announced. I'm pretty much sure that it was announced, this decision. Now, without NXG, it's again a different situation. The UTF may stay or may leave. I don't know. InstaCoverage, even with UTF, InstaCoverage has a legitimation for me at least, and I guess for the users as well, because of the execution time performance. In case, so UTF may be discontinued, then there is another situation. Either way, there is a use case, or there may be a use case for users who would like to migrate UTF unit tests to any other tool. Now we try to help this process, and we have an import utility inside InstaCoverage, which is a special API to import UTF unit tests into InstaCoverage. So that you don't have to do this translation manually. The start is basically in this example project. You don't see an InstaCoverage unit test yet. So when you execute the example, then you will see that the UTF unit test is imported into InstaCoverage. For the import, you need a UTF installation, because we use the parser of UTF to do the translation. After the translation, you don't need UTF. So basically, if the licensing is an issue, and it may be an issue because The UTF is a price is pricey. Then you need maybe only one license to do the imports, and then you don't need UTF any longer. Okay, so in case you're not familiar with the unit test framework, a very quick overview. So very similar to InstaCoverage unit tests, you have the LV tests, the LV test extension. And if you double click on it, and if you have UTF installed, then yeah, then you have a test configuration editor window similar to InstaCoverage. It's more feature rich, so you see more tabs here and more options. You see similar to us, so the setup and teardown is a thing in this test model as well. You see a custom setup is defined for this example, and the custom teardown is also defined. And these files are here. These VIs are here. Okay, you believe me? Okay, show you the inside. It does something. Okay, it's just for the sake of an example. So you have a custom setup, a custom teardown, and a target UTF unit test. And sorry, the VI in the test is this one. So basically it's the same. So these four assets will define a harness, very similar to InstaCoverage. Now this is the import itself. So it's basically very simple. So you have the target unit test that you would like to UTF unit test that you would like to transform into a destination InstaCoverage unit test, and you call our API. That's it. So let's execute it. Now in the background, UTF is in operation. So like I said, for this to work, you need UTF. Okay, so this was successful. I hope there was, yeah. So this is basically the output of the test. It basically tells you that there are warnings. So this is what I meant with the disclaimer that there are so many features and they may be used in the UTF unit tests. And in this case, I guess. Oops. Okay. Anyway. Yeah, so there was this breakpoint feature in the original UTF test file, which is a text file on disk, and we parse it and we say, okay, we don't support them. And this is the result of the import. So this model, so these assets are those that you know when you are an InstaCoverage user. So there is no exotic output. The only exotic thing is this. So if we look at the result, the harness, like I said, the harness is a map of your test. We have the InstaCoverage setup, the InstaCoverage teardown, they're always there. Plus, yeah, in the middle, we have the VI and the test. Plus, we have the setup and teardown VI from the UTF universe, so to say, and we don't touch them. We keep them as part of the test because they may implement important test logic. We keep them. We wire everything together. It's a pro feature anyway because it's API. It involves the API, and you have a executable test. So if I didn't try it today, so let's run this the original unit test using the UTF. This is the result. One passed, one total. So we have a pass test. So I expect that after transformation, we have a pass test too. Otherwise, the transformation is wrong. Obviously, this is a smoke test, but this is an important smoke test. So let's come here and run the unit test. And it's passed too with 2 test cases. So this is one test, but 2 test cases inside. Okay, so that's for the first 2 blocks, for the basic usage and the advanced usage, which basically was about the API and the UTF bridge. We call it sometimes internally the UTF InstaCoverage bridge. As a final remark, if I come back here, contact, yeah. Yeah, this is where we are, our office in Budapest, and you can use the contact us form to get in touch if you have any question. Maybe one more thing, yes, it's important that this is our company and we develop InstaCoverage. You see that we have various products. One is InstaCoverage, which is a smaller product. The other is the Inquiry Suite, which is a tool integration and data transformation tool. And we also do services with LabVIEW. So we for example, I mentioned my former company, the BSH. We do a very interesting hardware in the loop LabVIEW project with them. Why I'm mentioning it, it's interesting to see. Actually, what I wanted to show is this. I forgot that it's on this page. So we are an ISO certified 9001 certified company. If it's an issue for your company, and we are working on other certifications as well. Maybe an important and funny information is how we develop InstaCoverage. So InstaCoverage is implemented mostly in LabVIEW, and we test the InstaCoverage code as well. And how we unit test it, how we could use InstaCoverage to unit test InstaCoverage, maybe an older version, but we don't do that. We use the unit test framework because then we don't have a, I don't know, a meta conflict. So it's a quality tool, and it's really a very important aspect of our internal development of it. Thanks again for joining. Thank you very much for, again, Bea and Flora, for the hard work to make this session happen and to organize and prepare the session. Thanks also Balint and Daniel for the nice work. So the 3.3 version is a very nice version. We think seems stable, rich features. So thanks for the work. It's a milestone for us, which we would like to celebrate with you. And again, thanks for the audience. And get in touch with us if you have any questions through the contact form or through other ways. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.